Howdy, folks. This is Joseph P. Farrell. This is Friday, April the 8th, 2011. And we're here for another fireside chat, news and views from the Nefarium. It's kind of a strange day because I have a comment that a listener wanted to alert me about, and I need to respond to that. And then a brief comment that someone else wanted me to talk about interdisciplinary thinking, interdisciplinary spirit, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, let me get started with that. The comment that requires a bit of negative chat for a bit is a reader of the site and apparently someone who had been to the Two Space Programs conference in Amsterdam in Holland last week alerted me to the fact that uh, Mr. Hoagland had used some of Dr. Wood's research or something like that and presented his take, his understanding of what might have happened, a scenario that might have happened on 9/11, kind of based on her research. And then somehow, I don't know, because I haven't heard. Obviously, I wasn't at the conference. I don't have any plans to write any books about 9/11 using my or anybody else's research because I think it's a field that's pretty well been beaten to death. But someone was concerned that I was somehow involved in saying things about 9/11 or Space Wars scenario or something like that. And quite frankly, I'm not. I'm not working on any projects right now with Mr. Hoagland. I'm certainly not working on any projects with Dr. Judy Wood. I don't have any intentions of working on any projects with her. She's done her work. She's got her book out about 9/11, and I think it's pretty much now up to everybody to review her work and see what they think about it. So anyway, I don't know what's going on, folks, but whatever it is, it hasn't got anything to do with me. Anyway, that's subject number one. And then subject number two was kind of a more positive thing, an interesting thing that one of the website members asked me. I mentioned a comment about the necessity for an interdisciplinary spirit to examine and talk about some of these things that I write about, ancient history, ancient technology, and so on and so forth. And I really do think that that's an excellent question because let's look at the nature of the case. If we are looking at an artifact, say like the Great Pyramid, or say the blocks, the stone blocks that have been carved at Pumapunku, which is very close to Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, if we look at some of these things and attempt to explain them on the basis solely of, let's say, an engineering perspective, and by dint of that fact, what we immediately do and what we automatically close off is a category of evidence that may be relevant, and I underline the word may be relevant, to deciphering the nature of the case. In other words, in the case of the Great Pyramid, if we look at it solely from an engineering point of view, we're ignoring the texts. We're ignoring what they possibly might contribute as an understanding of that monument. By the same token, if we look solely at texts and try to make a determination about what ancient societies thought in terms of physics, in terms of history, and why they were building these structures, then again, we're not going to get a clear view because, number one, all texts have to be deciphered, and it's particularly true the further back you go, the more deciphering they need. So, at the very minimum, when we're approaching things like that, my approach has always been to, number one, give a kind of primacy or priority to the engineering or to the scientific aspects of it, but by the same token, use as much knowledge as modern science and engineering can bring to a monument and can bring to a text in order to decipher what those things might be saying, and then try to create a synthetic picture out of that. Now, One of the things I've always emphasized in my books is that when you say text, when I say text, in the context of writing about all of these ancient things, when I say text, what I mean by a text is the monument, any writings left behind. So, in other words, text for me is more than just like a book that you pick up and open and read. The monument itself is a kind of text. So, in other words, I'm looking at a very synthetic activity. Now, in looking at that activity, there's a third component that I think is absolutely necessary, particularly if you want to understand the ancient frame of mind, and that is the idea of analogies. We all learn by using analogies. We learn from the familiar to the unfamiliar, and we draw parallels between a familiar context and an unfamiliar context. Well, that way of thinking is very much the ancient way of thinking. And in fact, I'm writing a great deal about it in the book I'm writing now. Because if you want to get into the ancient frame of mind and then be able to draw connections seen properly, you have to do, again, you have to decode the text to a certain extent. But once you do, then what you are trying to do is see connections between what the writings say or what their belief system says and these structures that they're building. When you do that, interesting things begin to pop out. So I do think in terms of ancient times, yes, you need to approach it with an interdisciplinary spirit. And the more disciplines you can bring to the subject, engineering, science, mathematics, philosophy, metaphysics, theology, even in some cases, history, and so on and so forth. The more disciplines that you can bring to the subject, the better off you're going to be. Now, having said that, I don't think that the interdisciplinary approach is the same thing as a committee approach. I am not opposed to the idea of committees or authors, co-authors approaching a subject and trying to pool their respective areas of expertise in order to understand something. I'm certainly not opposed to that, but it's my belief that the most trenchant insights in terms of alternative research that looks at all of these ancient sites, that looks at the implications for our understanding of history and of human origins. It's my belief that an individual is better suited to speculate and to draw insights and conclusions than is a committee, because an individual will be more willing, so to speak, to crawl out on a limb and to offer speculations, to offer conclusions that a committee would be much more reserved about. So I like the idea of argued speculation in this kind of work, because we have to remember it is all argued speculation. It is speculation. But depending on how you construct this interdisciplinary synthesis, that argument will have more or less strength depending on what you bring to it. And my experience has been when you read the alternative research that's been produced by committees, they're a little more reluctant to speculate on the implications. And oftentimes that means that you might miss a crucial insight, a crucial connection that makes some things fit for some other people. So it's a very difficult kind of thing to explain, but I think to kind of draw a rough analogy, I think it's better to do this kind of research, to have a Leonardo da Vinci doing this kind of research, rather than to have the Senate subcommittee on ancient artifacts and preservation doing this kind of research, because in that spirit, you know what's going to happen, that the committee is going to kill any spirit of inventiveness or inquiry or speculation or even wanting to play out certain scenarios in the mind. So anyway, I thought it was a really good question. I hope that kind of explains my approach to it. Arthur was the fellow that asked me about doing a comment about interdisciplinary approaches to all of this. And I do want to mention one more thing. It's also, I'm not trying to say that this interdisciplinary approach is only applicable to ancient stuff. I use it all the time, even in the Nazi books, and particularly there. You know, I pull on everything that I have in my library, in my memory, that I can dig up in research. I pull everything that I can from history, from physics, from engineering, from occult tradition, esoteric tradition that I can when I'm writing those Nazi books, because again, all those subjects are in play. And I kind of, once again, allow the science to control how I piece together the other things in that picture. But yeah, it's a good question. And if there were a formally explicit way to talk about what I do uh, in these fireside chats, I would. But there are some papers in the members only area that go into a little bit of the much more formal nature of how I do this and how I approach these subjects. Anyway, that's it for Friday, April the 8th, 2011. This is news and views from the Nefarium. I might be back later this weekend. Like I always say, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Mostly I'm not, but sometimes I am. If I see or think of something interesting to comment on, I'll see you again later, folks. Anyway, catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.